I'm Abigail, and until last year, I lived under the suffocating weight of my parents' financial control. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family's sprawling suburban house, luxury cars in the driveway, and holiday cards that could grace magazine covers. But behind our perfectly manicured facade lay a web of manipulation disguised as love. My father, Richard, built his reputation as a successful financial advisor by preaching the importance of fiscal responsibility to his clients. At home, he wielded money like a weapon, reminding me constantly that, as long as I pay the bills, you'll follow my rules. Every purchase required justification. Every expense faced scrutiny. And every dream came with a price tag he deemed too high. My mother, Margaret, had been homecoming queen and valedictorian facts she reminded me of whenever I fell short of her impossible standards. She managed our family's social calendar with military precision, ensuring we projected success at every garden club meeting and charity gala. "Appearances matter, Abigail," she'd say while critiquing my outfit choices. "People judge based on what they see." Their marriage functioned more like a business partnership than a love story. Margaret maintained our social standing while Richard controlled the finances. Their power struggles played out through me, their only child, who became both trophy and burden depending on the day. By my senior year in college, majoring in graphic design, the tension had reached a breaking point. My parents viewed my chosen field as frivolous, a phase I needed to outgrow. "Artists starve," Richard would remind me during our monthly budget reviews, where he dissected every purchase of design software and art supplies with forensic precision. The joint bank accounts they'd insisted on setting up to help manage expenses gave them complete visibility into my financial life. I couldn't buy a coffee without facing potential interrogation. Independence seemed impossible when every transaction required their approval. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this battle longer than they realized. Years of helping them set up their online banking because they didn't understand all that computer nonsense had given me insights they'd forgotten about. I knew their password patterns, their security questions, their digital vulnerabilities. I just never imagined I'd need to use that knowledge to survive. 3 months before graduation, Richard delivered his final verdict during Sunday dinner. "Switch majors to business or lose our financial support entirely," he announced, cutting his steak with surgical precision. 4 years is enough time wasted on doodling. Time to grow up." Margaret nodded in agreement, adding, "Your father and I only want what's best for you. This graphic design phase has gone on long enough." I sat frozen, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. "I'm halfway through my final portfolio project. I can't just switch majors now." "Then I suppose you'll need to figure out how to pay for your final semester yourself," Richard replied calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than demolishing my future. The following weeks became increasingly unbearable. Margaret's criticisms reached new heights, targeting everything from my hair, so unkempt for job interviews, to my friends, "Jessica clearly has no ambition." Richard began questioning every transaction on my account, even a $5 coffee becoming subject to interrogation. My mental health deteriorated under the constant pressure. Jessica, my best friend since freshman year, noticed immediately. "You look exhausted all the time, Abby," she said during our study session at the library. "I'm worried about you." I started small rebellions, staying out past their reasonable curfew, turning my phone off for hours at a time, applying for graphic design internships in secret. Each tiny act of defiance felt both terrifying and exhilarating. During this period, I began researching financial independence with newfound urgency. I learned about student emergency housing, work-study programs, and scholarship opportunities for students in crisis. My manager at the campus coffee shop agreed to pay part of my wages in cash, which I stored in a lockbox hidden in my dorm room. The more I prepared for independence, the more I realized how much my parents had isolated me from practical life skills. I'd never opened a bank account alone, never applied for credit, never navigated bureaucracy without their intervention. Their control had created a dependency that felt almost insurmountable. But I was determined to prove them wrong. My 22nd birthday arrived with unseasonable rain and an atmosphere so tense it felt like walking through a minefield. I woke with a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, this milestone would soften my parents' stance. Perhaps they'd remember that behind their expectations and my resistance was their daughter, a person deserving of love regardless of her major or career choices. Downstairs, my parents moved through their morning routine in silence. My mother sipped her black coffee while checking emails on her tablet. My father buttered his toast with mathematical precision. Neither looked up when I entered. "Good morning," I ventured, my voice sounding small even to myself. My mother glanced up briefly, then returned to her tablet. My father continued reading the financial section of his newspaper. Neither acknowledged that today was any different from any other Tuesday. I poured myself coffee, the silence pressing against my ears. After several minutes, I couldn't stand it anymore. "So, it's my birthday today," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "We're aware of the date, Abigail," my mother replied without looking up. That evening, I received a text from Jessica. "Your mom called asking weird questions about your birthday plans. Something feels off. Call me." I bought myself a small chocolate cupcake and a single candle from the campus bakery, a private celebration just in case. When I arrived home, both my parents' cars were already there, unusual for a weekday. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. My parents sat in the living room, postures formal as though preparing for a business meeting rather than greeting their daughter on her birthday. "Sit down, Abigail," Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from them, positioning me like an employee being evaluated. "Your mother and I have been reviewing the household finances." He began without preamble, opening his folder to reveal printouts of what appeared to be my banking transactions. "Your expenses have become untenable." The argument escalated quickly, covering familiar territory, my inadequate career prospects, my supposed ingratitude, my failure to meet their expectations. But something was different this time. There was a finality to their tone I hadn't heard before. When I pointed out that I'd be financially independent after graduation in just 3 months, Richard slammed his hand against the coffee table. "You're nothing but a burden," he shouted, his face flushing red. "Always have been. Your mother and I have carried you for 22 years. And what do we have to show for it? A daughter who disrespects our wishes and wastes our hard-earned money on a useless degree." Margaret spoke next, her voice arctic cold. "We're done supporting you, Abigail, completely done." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "It means you need to move out," Richard stated flatly. Tonight, as in now, on my birthday. "The date is irrelevant," Margaret said. "We've made our decision." Despite my terror, I would not surrender my dreams, not even facing homelessness. I raced upstairs to pack, hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my suitcase. Richard called up the stairs. "You have 30 minutes, Abigail? Anything left behind becomes our property." Standing on the porch with my meager possessions, I heard the deadbolt slide into place behind me with grim finality. Rain began to fall as I loaded my car, soaking my hair and mingling with the tears on my cheeks. Happy birthday to me. Jessica's apartment was tiny, barely big enough for her and her roommate Kimberly, but they welcomed me without hesitation. I collapsed on their worn sofa, suitcases still packed beside me, unable to process the seismic shift in my reality. "They really gave you no warning?" Kimberly asked, bringing me tea I couldn't drink past the lump in my throat. "None," I whispered. "One minute I had a home, the next I was homeless." That first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling as questions circled like vultures. How would I pay for food? Where would I live after this temporary arrangement? Could I finish my degree? What would happen if I got sick without health insurance? I checked my banking app at 3 a.m., discovering my parents had already removed their access from my account. The balance was devastating, $237.48. Everything else had been in the joint account they controlled, now inaccessible to me. The University Financial Aid Office opened at 9 a.m. I was waiting outside the door at 8:30, clutching my student ID like a lifeline. Mrs. Sullivan, a counselor I'd never met before, listened to my stammered explanation with practiced sympathy. "Unfortunately, your FAFSA still lists your parents' income," she explained. "To qualify as an independent student, you'd need to prove they've completely cut financial ties." "They have," I insisted. "They kicked me out last night." "We need documentation," she said gently. "Tax forms showing you support yourself, or legal emancipation papers. Without those, you're still considered a dependent for financial aid purposes." I left with a stack of emergency loan applications and scholarship opportunities, but nothing that would solve my immediate housing crisis or pay for next month's tuition. By day 3 of homelessness, I was sleeping 3 hours a night, showering in campus gym facilities, and trying to maintain my class schedule while my life imploded. The constant stress was affecting everything: my grades, my portfolio work, my mental health. Then came the final blow. After checking my small personal account, I found it frozen with a notification that a dispute had been filed. My parents had somehow convinced the bank that the account was opened fraudulently, despite my name being the only one on it. I sat in the campus computer lab staring at the screen in disbelief, feeling like the ground had completely disappeared beneath my feet. "Bank problems?" asked Tyler from my advanced design class, setting down his laptop beside me. "My parents froze my only account," I explained, too defeated to hide my situation anymore. "They kicked me out last week, and now they're making sure I can't access what little money I have left." Tyler whistled low. "That's seriously messed up." After a pause, he added, "My dad did something similar when I came out. Tried to control me financially when emotional manipulation didn't work. How did you handle it?" I asked. "Not always legally," he admitted with a wry smile. "But I learned a lot about financial security vulnerabilities in the process." "Want to get some coffee? I think we need to talk." At the off-campus coffee shop, Tyler explained his own story of family rejection and financial control. His father had used similar tactics: joint accounts, monitoring expenses, threatening to cut support unless Tyler changed his lifestyle choices. "The thing about financial controllers," Tyler said, "is they often have their own vulnerabilities. They're so focused on controlling others that they neglect their own security." Our conversation shifted to the surprisingly lax security measures most financial institutions employed. Tyler explained how many people reused passwords across accounts, rarely changed security questions, and left digital backdoors wide open. "Most people don't realize how vulnerable their accounts are," he explained, "especially older folks who set up online banking years ago and never updated their security." A thought began forming in my mind. My parents made me set up their online banking profiles years ago. They always struggled with technology. "Tja," Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Did they ever change those passwords?" "Probably not," I admitted. "My dad uses the same password pattern for everything: birth year, plus company name, plus an exclamation point." "And do they use the same email for recovery options?" I nodded slowly, remembering how I'd linked both their accounts to my father's primary email address because he found multiple logins confusing. "Just saying," Tyler said carefully. "You might still have more access than you realize. But here's the thing. There's a difference between criminal hacking and using legitimate security features. Banks offer fraud protection services for a reason." He explained how credit freezes worked, the difference between fraud alerts and security freezes, and how to request verification processes that were technically legitimate but maximally inconvenient. "The beauty of fraud alerts," Tyler explained. is that they're security measures, not vandalism. You're protecting accounts from potential fraud just very thoroughly. That evening, I received an email from my father with the subject line, "Your belongings." The message was brief and cruel. "We've begun donating your abandoned property to Goodwill. Your childish books and art supplies will serve some deserving charity cases. Perhaps this will teach you responsibility." My childhood books, my art supplies collected over years, my portfolio materials all being discarded as casually as they'd discarded me. Something hardened inside me. If they could destroy my life without warning or remorse, perhaps they deserved to experience some consequences of their own. I spent the next day researching at the university library, carefully documenting everything I could remember about helping them set up their accounts. I also researched the legal implications of various actions, what constituted illegal access versus using credentials I legitimately possessed. Where was the line between inconveniencing someone and harassing them through cautious conversations with mutual connections? I learned my parents had been telling family friends I'd had a mental break and moved out voluntarily after making unreasonable demands. This campaign to protect their reputation by destroying mine further fueled my determination. I discovered through careful observation that my parents lived largely on credit despite their appearance of wealth. Richard leased his luxury car rather than owning it outright. Margaret's shopping habits were supported by multiple credit cards. Their lifestyle projected affluence while hiding substantial debt. A meeting with Mr. Martinez at Student Legal Services confirmed what I suspected: my parents' eviction methods were legally questionable. "Tenant rights apply even to family members," he explained. "They should have given you proper written notice, typically 30 days. This information wouldn't get me back into their house, but it validated my sense of injustice and strengthened my resolve. With my plan forming, I waited for the perfect moment. Credit card payment due dates typically fell between the 1st and 5th of the month. Richard's car payment processed automatically on the 3rd. The country club membership fees were charged on the 4th. The timing had to maximize inconvenience without causing permanent damage. On the evening of the 30th, the university computer lab hummed with the quiet intensity of students cramming for finals. I chose a workstation in the corner, away from security cameras, and opened an incognito browser window. My hands trembled slightly as I typed, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally taking action after weeks of feeling powerless. I'd spent days preparing for this moment, using the library's research databases. I'd studied legitimate fraud protection services offered by major banks. I'd created an encrypted email account through Proton Mail, accessed via the university's VPN to mask my location. Every step was carefully documented in a notebook I planned to destroy afterward. The ethical weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on my shoulders. Tyler's words echoed in my mind. "There's a difference between criminal hacking and using legitimate access you already have." I wasn't stealing money or destroying accounts. I was using security features designed to protect account holders. I navigated to my parents' bank website and entered the credentials I knew by heart. Richard 1975 Advisors, the same password he'd used for everything since starting his firm. The account dashboard opened immediately, displaying balances that made my $237 seem even more pathetic. They had more money sitting in checking than I'd seen in years. My finger hovered over the mouse as doubt crept in. Was this who I wanted to become? Someone who struck from the shadows, causing pain from a distance. Then I remembered Margaret's voice. "We're done supporting you. Abigail, completely done." I remembered standing in the rain with my suitcases while they watched from their warm, dry house. I remembered the email about donating my belongings to charity cases. I clicked on the Security Settings tab. The first action was simple. I updated their fraud alert preferences to the highest sensitivity level. This was a legitimate service the bank offered to protect customers from identity theft. Every transaction over $100 would now require additional verification. Next, I enabled travel notifications for suspicious geographic activity. Since my parents rarely traveled beyond their small social circle, this would flag most of their regular spending as potentially fraudulent. The most crucial step involved their automatic payments. I didn't cancel them. That would be too obvious and potentially illegal. Instead, I modified the payment verification requirements. Their car lease, country club membership, and utility bills would now require two-factor authentication for processing. Each change triggered automated emails to my father's account, which I knew he rarely checked. The notifications would blend into his usual spam, unlikely to be noticed until the effects began. The entire process took 23 minutes. As I logged out and cleared the browser history, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and nausea. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over my situation. Walking back to Jessica's apartment through the cool night air, I tried to convince myself I'd only activated legitimate security features. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had become someone who fought dirty when cornered. The question was whether I could live with that version of myself. The first domino fell at 8:47 a.m. the next morning. According to the timestamp on my monitoring email, an automated message informed me that a transaction at Bella Costa Fine Dining had been flagged for verification and temporarily declined pending customer confirmation. I was sitting in Professor Willis's morning lecture when my phone buzzed with a forwarded text from my cousin Stephanie. The family group chat was lighting up. Mom's card got declined at breakfast with her book club. She's mortified. Dad thinks someone stole their info. By lunch, the trickle had become a flood. Margaret's attempt to pay for her weekly manicure triggered another fraud alert. The payment required a phone call to the bank's verification department, where she spent 40 minutes on hold before speaking to a representative who needed to verify her identity for security purposes. "This is ridiculous," she reportedly told the nail technician, her voice tight with embarrassment. "We've banked with them for 15 years. Richard's humiliation came that afternoon during his lunch meeting with potential clients, a retirement planning seminar for a local business. According to office gossip that reached Jessica through her mother's connections, his corporate credit card was declined when he tried to pay for the meal. "I'm so sorry," he'd stammered, fumbling for his wallet. "There seems to be some kind of security issue with our accounts." The junior associate from his office had to cover the bill while Richard called the bank from the restaurant bathroom. But the real chaos began on the 3rd of the month when their automatic payments failed to process. Richard's luxury car lease payment, $847 monthly for his BMW, was declined due to insufficient payment verification. The leasing company's automated system immediately generated a late notice and assessed a $75 penalty fee. More damaging was the email marking his account as past due, which would affect his credit score if not resolved quickly. The country club membership proved even more problematic. Their monthly dues of $450 failed to process, triggering an automated suspension of their charging privileges. Margaret discovered this when she tried to book their usual Saturday dinner reservation. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson," the hostess said, checking her computer with obvious discomfort. "It looks like there's an issue with your account. You'll need to speak with the membership office." The membership office d'etat, of course, he was closed until Monday. By day 4, my parents' perfect facade was developing visible cracks. Margaret canceled her standing hair appointment, claiming a scheduling conflict rather than admit she couldn't guarantee her card would work. Richard postponed a client dinner, citing administrative issues that should be resolved soon. Their neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Chen from next door mentioned to her daughter, who happened to work with Jessica's mom, that she'd overheard raised voices coming from the Henderson house, unusual for a family that prided itself on maintaining appearances. The psychological impact was arguably worse than the financial inconvenience. Margaret, who had built her identity around social status and financial stability, found herself making excuses to friends about why she couldn't join their usual activities. Richard, whose professional reputation depended on projecting financial expertise, was forced to explain to business partners why his own accounts were experiencing technical difficulties. Through my monitoring email, I watched their increasingly frantic attempts to resolve the situation. Bank representatives kept requesting additional documentation to verify their identities. Each phone call seemed to trigger new security protocols, creating an endless loop of verification requirements. The irony wasn't lost on me. The financial advisor who had controlled every aspect of my economic life was now completely unable to control his own. But as I refreshed my monitoring email for the dozenth time that day, an uncomfortable realization began to creep in. The satisfaction I'd expected from their suffering felt hollow, almost nauseating. Watching my parents struggle wasn't healing my pain, it was creating a different kind of ache in my chest. "You've checked that email 12 times since I sat down," Jessica observed, sliding into the library chair across from me. "That's more than you've worked on your portfolio in 2 days." I closed my laptop quickly, but her words hit their mark. My final portfolio, the culmination of 4 years of study, sat neglected while I obsessed over every detail of my parents' financial chaos. I started, then stopped. What was I doing? Monitoring my revenge like some kind of vindictive day trader. "You're becoming obsessed," Jessica said gently. "And it's changing you." She was right. I'd started checking the monitoring email every hour, sometimes more. I found myself staying up late reading about my parents' failed payment attempts, feeling a sick satisfaction that immediately curdled into guilt. Sleep became elusive, plagued by dreams where I was both victim and perpetrator. My art suffered most dramatically. Professor Willis had always praised the emotional authenticity of my work, but my recent pieces felt mechanical, cold. During our last portfolio review, she'd frowned at my latest designs. "These are technically proficient, Abigail, but they lack your usual emotional depth. They feel calculated." What's changed? I couldn't tell her that my heart had hardened into something sharp and unforgiving, that every design choice came filtered through anger rather than inspiration, that I was creating from a place of vengeance rather than vision. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I should have been preparing for the internship interview that could launch my career. Instead, I was refreshing my email, hoping for updates on whether my father's business dinner had been disrupted by another card decline. Jessica found me hunched over my laptop at 11 p.m., the portfolio presentation I was supposed to be working on forgotten on the desk beside me. "Abby, look at yourself," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "You're checking that phone like your dad used to check his financial statements, all calculated and cold." Her words struck like lightning. I looked down at my hands gripping the laptop edges, knuckles white with tension. The expression on my face, reflected in the black screen, looked disturbingly familiar. It was the same calculating coldness I'd seen in my father's eyes during his budget reviews. "Oh, God," I whispered, "I'm becoming just like him." The realization hit with devastating clarity. I was employing the same tactics my father had used: strategic manipulation, emotional distance, using vulnerability as a weapon. The only difference was the target. That night, I received an email that should have filled me with excitement. "Dear Ms. Henderson," it began, "we are pleased to invite you to interview for our summer design internship program. Professor Willis speaks very highly of your work, describing it as exceptional and deeply authentic." Authentic. The word mocked me. How could my work be authentic when I was living a lie, consumed by revenge instead of creation? The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 5 days away. This was the opportunity I dreamed about, the chance to launch my career at one of the city's most respected design firms. The stipend alone would cover my basic expenses for the summer, and the experience could open doors I'd never imagined. But as I stared at the interview details, my mind immediately wandered to whether my parents had resolved their bank verification issues yet. The internship that should have consumed my thoughts felt secondary to monitoring their suffering. I closed my laptop and walked to Jessica's tiny bathroom, where I stared at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. The face looking back was thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under eyes that had lost their spark. When had I stopped seeing possibility in my future and started seeing only my parents' problems? In that cramped bathroom, surrounded by toothbrushes and face wash that belonged to people who loved me unconditionally, I finally understood what Jessica had been trying to tell me. My revenge wasn't freeing me from my parents' control, it was just changing the nature of that control. Instead of being their victim, I had become their obsessed antagonist. Either way, my life revolved around them. The most painful truth was that no amount of financial inconvenience would ever make them truly understand the emotional damage they'd caused. They would never wake up one morning and realize they'd been cruel. They would never experience the specific pain of being rejected by the people who were supposed to love you most. Some lessons couldn't be taught. Some people would never learn. And accepting that was the only way I could finally be free. Standing in that bathroom at midnight, I made the hardest decision of my young life. I could continue down this path of calculated revenge, becoming more like my father every day, or I could choose to invest that same energy in building a life so strong and beautiful that their cruelty couldn't touch it. The internship interview material sat on Jessica's desk, waiting for me to choose my future over my past. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I had to do. The decision crystallized when I opened my laptop to work on my interview presentation, and instead found myself automatically navigating to my monitoring email. The pattern was so automatic, so compulsive, that I hadn't even realized I was doing it. I stared at the screen, cursor hovering over the refresh button, and finally understood what Jessica had been trying to tell me. This wasn't freedom. It was just another form of bondage. Using the anonymous email account, I created detailed instructions for resolving fraud alerts and security verifications information that would allow my parents to restore their financial access without revealing my involvement. I wrote it as if it came from their bank's customer service department, providing a legitimate solution to their legitimate security measures. I scheduled the email to send automatically in 2 days, giving them enough time to feel the full impact of their disruption while providing a clear path to resolution. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I deleted the monitoring email account entirely. When I told Jessica about my decision, she hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "This takes more strength than continuing the revenge ever would." She was right. Letting go required facing the painful truth that no amount of financial inconvenience could ever make my parents truly comprehend the emotional damage of their rejection. Some lessons they would never learn, and accepting that was part of my own healing. With my decision made, I redirected my energy entirely toward the internship opportunity. My interview presentation focused on a series of designs exploring themes of independence and resilience work that emerged directly from my recent experiences, but transformed pain into art. The portfolio review went better than I'd dared hope. "Your recent work shows remarkable emotional depth," the creative director noted. "There's an authenticity here that's rare in student portfolios." 3 days later, the internship offer came through not just the position, but a modest stipend that would allow me to maintain independence through the summer months. I found affordable off-campus housing with 2 other design students for the following semester, ensuring stability beyond my emergency housing period. The university's financial aid office, working with documentation of my parents' abandonment, approved emergency grants and work-study opportunities that would cover my final semester. My campus job in the design department expanded into a teaching assistant position, providing both income and valuable experience. Professor Willis became more than an academic mentor. She became a champion who saw potential where my parents had seen only disappointment. Most importantly, I began building a chosen family of people who valued me for exactly who I was. Jessica remained my closest friend, but my circle expanded to include fellow students navigating similar challenges of family rejection or financial crisis. Through the University Counseling Center, I worked with Dr. Nelson to process not just the immediate trauma of being disowned, but the deeper patterns of control and manipulation that had shaped my entire childhood. Breaking generational patterns requires conscious effort, she explained. Awareness is the first step, but new behaviors cement the change. 1 year later, my 23rd birthday arrived with sunshine streaming through the windows of the apartment I shared with Jessica and Rachel, a fellow design student who'd become another chosen sister. For the first time in years, I woke without dread, without the weight of others' expectations pressing down on my chest. The small gathering that evening wasn't elaborate, just genuine friends sharing pizza and chocolate cake in our cozy living room. No performance required, no standards to meet except being authentically myself. As I blew out the candles, surrounded by people who had become family through choice rather than obligation, I made a wish, not for my parents to suffer, but for my own heart to keep healing, to remain open to joy despite past wounds. The year had transformed me in ways I could never have anticipated. I'd graduated with honors despite the financial obstacles, walking across the stage while Jessica, Rachel, and Professor Willis cheered from the audience. No family members attended, but their absence no longer defined the experience. My summer internship had converted into a junior designer position at a small but respected firm. The work was challenging and fulfilling, providing enough income for a modest but stable life. More importantly, it validated my choice to pursue my passion despite my parents' dismissal. Financial independence had become both practical reality and personal philosophy. I tracked every dollar not out of anxiety, but out of determination never to be financially vulnerable again. I'd established credit in my own name, built an emergency fund, and learned to navigate bureaucracy without anyone's intervention. Occasional updates about my parents still reached me through mutual connections, though I no longer sought this information. They'd eventually resolved their financial difficulties, apparently attributing the problems to bank security updates and identity theft protection services. Their attempts to contact me had increased after their situation stabilized. Messages oscillating between demands for reconciliation on their terms and guilt-inducing references to family obligation. I maintained minimal contact brief, neutral responses that established clear boundaries without cruelty. When Richard demanded the return of family heirlooms he claimed were in my possession, I replied simply that I had taken only my personal belongings when leaving. When Margaret suggested a fresh start without acknowledging any wrongdoing, I declined politely but firmly. The most profound lesson from that turbulent year was understanding that my parents' rejection reflected their limitations, not my worth, their inability to love unconditionally, to support my dreams, to see me as a person rather than an extension of themselves that was their failure, not mine. The revenge that had initially seemed so satisfying had provided only temporary relief. Real healing came not from making them suffer, but from building a life they had no power to damage. Every achievement earned through my own effort, every genuine connection formed without manipulation, every moment of joy experienced on my own terms became a foundation stone of my new existence. That evening, as my chosen family cleaned up cake plates and shared stories late into the night, I realized the truth. I'd been too hurt to see a year ago the greatest revenge isn't making others suffer. It's refusing to let their cruelty define you. The family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into when that birth family fails to understand what family really means. Love isn't control, support isn't conditional, and independence, though terrifying to achieve, offers something no amount of financial security can provide: the freedom to be authentically yourself. In my journal that night, I wrote, 1 year ago, I thought my life was ending. Today, I understand it was just beginning on my own terms, in my own way, surrounded by people who love me not for what I might become, but for who I already am. Sometimes the most painful rejections become unexpected gifts, forcing us to discover strengths we never knew we possessed and leading us to connections we never would have made while trapped in others' expectations. The girl who stood on that porch with 2 suitcases in the rain had been broken, but not defeated. The woman who now lived independently, loved genuinely, and created fearlessly had emerged from those ashes stronger than she ever imagined possible, and that, I realized, was the best revenge of all living well, loving freely, and refusing to be diminished by those who couldn't recognize her worth,